talked about what some people view as off-brand addictions. We've talked about sex addiction. And today we're going to talk about gambling as addictive. And if gambling is addictive, why are we pushing it so hard? Let's start with, as we often do, DSM-5. That's the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. And it tells us in America what is addictive. And ironically, nothing's addictive except gambling. So the official document for the American Psychiatric Association, of the American Medical Association, tells us that there's one thing in the universe that they label addictive: gambling. No drugs are called addictive.
Can I ask you a question about that? Because you would know, and it's a real question. Is it the emphasis that you're putting on, like you're writing the DSM kind of when you do this, and you say, the one single thing in the universe that's addictive is gambling. Now, in one sense, it's the only thing that they wrote the word addictive about. Is it possible that that's some sort of a slight slip? Do you think that they mean that kind of emphasis, that gambling's addictive in a way that other things aren't?
They have a discussion section. Mm-hmm. As we've discussed, they specifically ruled out sex as being addictive. Mm-hmm. So they can't later come in and say, well, sex is addictive, without like the Supreme Court, like overruling Roe v.
Right.
And they also considered gaming. By the way, sex and gaming are both described as addictive in the International Classification of Diseases 11, which is the European version of DSM-5. Mm-hmm. And with gaming, they were more up in the air. They said, well, maybe it is, and we'll have to reconsider this. But remember, DSM-5 was written in 2013. So it's been a decade. And they found no urgent need to say, we've been thinking about it, and gaming is addictive. So they explicitly rule out addiction with regard to drugs. They don't even use the word dependence, because you can't call opioids addictive, because a lot of people take opioids because they are the AMA, and they want people to take opioids. So they can't say, some people need to take painkillers, but we're going to say they're addicted. That just doesn't work. It's not kosher. You can't recommend something as being optimal for a human being and then say, oh, that's a bad thing. So they just threw out the whole drug category. And now they're mucking around in the behavioral category, and they're sticking their finger in and pulling out a plum. Oh, gambling. Oh, sex. No. Gaming, no. It's an irrational exercise that comes from saying, let's make a list of things that are addictive and not addictive. Isn't that a good way to understand the universe? And what their exercise, which is 10 years old, shows us is it's not. Addiction is a relationship people have to a specific object or activity. It's not a thing that can be addictive.
So why do you think, thinking back to 2013, not that long ago, it seems like even with drugs, and you mentioned a reason for it, people take painkillers, so we can't say that everyone's just going to be addicted. So we got to put it to a scale. It seems like they were putting everything to kind of a scale when it came to having a disorder related to that thing. Why do you think, and I'm sure you'll talk about this, that gambling was left on its own as not something that was on this scale, independent, that could be just left alone, not labeled addictive? Why the word addictive with gambling?
Well, that's a complex social psychological phenomenon. It has something to do with Charles O'Brien's brain. He was head of the addiction labeling committee. I mean, people know something is addictive, and let's start with gambling. Why do we say gambling's addictive? Because there are human beings, perhaps you know some, but we know they exist, who go into a gambling casino or who gamble online, who spend all of their money, who can't stop.
Or other people's money, right?
or other, and they dissipate their family earnings, and they're left completely bereft. They commit suicide, they're divorced, they steal. So what do you call that? That's addictive. We know there are gambling addicts. And then the question becomes, okay, people can become addicted to gambling. Well, the question becomes, is that common? Is that typical? And of course, the same answer applies there as applies to opioids. This applies to everything. Well, most Americans have bought some kind of a ticket, a gambling ticket, or played bingo, or done something like that, and they didn't become addicted. Maybe a lot of people have gone to gambling casinos and they've spent more than they wanted. It wasn't necessarily a positive experience, but they didn't go home and sell their house, bring back all the money and gamble some more until they were left bereft. So to say that something is addictive is to say something obvious about any powerful experience, including sex, obviously, and love. On the other hand, to label it addictive implies something. And now we get into myth making, which is sort of where I'm headed. To this day, most Americans and most doctors, probably, if you said, oh, what happens if you take heroin? They'll say, oh, you become addicted. And most Americans would probably say, oh, if you take heroin once, you become addicted, which is patently absurd. And we know it, of course, Carl Hart's written a book, Drug Use for Normal People, which he describes himself taking heroin. But there are millions of people besides Carl Hart who've taken heroin, but many millions have taken opioid painkillers. And if you go back to Norman Zinberg, he'll say, well, people go to the hospital, they take opioid painkillers for a week or weeks, and they're getting real opioids. A guy out in the street of New York City in the 1960s, when they were developing these categories, buy some heroin in the street, what's he buying? There's not even any opioid in it. And he might become addicted. So obviously, the drug per se does not cause addiction. So how does the average American doesn't think about DSM-5. How does the average psychiatrist think about DSM-5? If they're somebody who's subject to myths, they might say, heroin is really addictive, even though it doesn't say so. That means if you take heroin once, you become addicted. So if gambling's addictive, that means if you gamble once, you become addicted. And they're just left in a muddle. And so the reason I'm in the field of addiction and drugs is because everything we say about it is not only nonsensical, it's nonsensical with even 1/10 of a section of reflection about it. Oh, I know heroin's addictive, that we don't say it's addictive. That means you take it once, you become addicted. Well, of course, if you buy a lottery ticket, you don't become addicted forever. That's crazy. So let's go into the recent American history of gambling, given this backdrop. Gambling is like it's one of the 7 sins or something. I mean, gambling was illegal because society in America said, well, gambling's bad, it's wrong. And then at some point they threw, alcohol was in there for a while, but out. And for a while, heroin and still heroin, but less so, was in there. Well, it's illegal because it's bad, it's a sin, it's wrong. And those things got all conglomerated. But there was, like all sin things, it existed. And numbers was a big inner city racket. Malcolm X was a numbers guy. That was his line of work, where, people would see him in the street of Harlem and they give him $5 or $1, and they'd say, here's my number, 364, and he'd write it down on a piece of paper and he'd keep it. And then, some number came up and that guy would win some amount of money. And somewhere along the only legal gambling while this is going on in the United States was in Las Vegas. Somehow, this isn't going to be a definitive history of what's legal about gambling, but they allowed casinos in Los Angeles. And it had something to do with the mob, and all that stuff. We see movies about, those mobsters who colonized Las Vegas, and somehow they got the state to legalize gambling in the United States. I don't know, passed some law that said, well, you could gamble in Las Vegas. Much later, New Jersey was having financial problems. They decided, well, let's legalize gambling in New Jersey and solve our problems. And that happened. And the results weren't good. I mean, Donald Trump has long ago lived down his bad beginnings. He built casinos in New Jersey, all of which have been wrecked and destroyed. Atlantic City is as bad a slum as you can get in New Jersey. And we had some bad, I used to live in New Jersey. We had some bad slums. So, and they all went bankrupt. And and of course, they justified legalizing gambling in New Jersey by saying, well, we're going to use the money for education. That's the way you do it. New Jersey's hurting like every place else in terms of education. And after a while, the money started leaking into the general budget. And so that's just it. Once the state starts depending on the lottery, and they need the money. And so it's not so bad anymore. And so we went from Las Vegas gambling to, well, let's have some casinos in New Jersey. God, that didn't work out so well. To, okay, let's do the lottery. Let's tax people and get money for something that's going on anyhow. And people often, the way they characterize the lottery is it's a way of taxing the poor to help the rich, because lottery number buying is a downscale socioeconomic enterprise. Now, in only recent years have we gotten into legalizing online gambling. There's no correct answer to this, Zach.
Okay, I'll bite on this one.
Why all of a sudden did we decide to start legalizing online gambling?
Man, because it's ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And it's I guess probably the same things apply. There's a way that we can differentiate. What do you call that? Distribute money to different places. Yeah. And so you might as well, there's a ubiquitous sort of technology thing that's happening, and rather than have half of the population, you have to be committed to making it illegal if you're going to make it illegal. I mean, if you're going to have a consequence for something being illegal, you have to be committed. And what are you going to do? Arrest 20% of the population? So people figured, we'll make it legal.
They became acclimated to it. People are gambling on it, and it's become widespread. And gambling is associated with these, all kinds of online football pools. And it's sort of like, everybody's doing it. My friend's doing it. And we don't get any money out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, it's not so bad, really. It's sort of like, well, I take opioid painkillers and I didn't get addicted. Well, people do it, and they're no worse or better than they used to be. In the old days, you could say, well, look at those numbers runners in Harlem. It's hard to imagine. They were viewed sort of like heroin dealers. Like, look at them. They're doing an illegal activity. They'll kill you. They're in the street corners. And now when something's like in your home computer and your neighbor's doing it, I used to live in Morris County, and we were politically active, and we were sort of canvassing with a group of people one day. And there was a guy in the basement who ran an online gambling operation out of his basement in Morris County, New Jersey, which is one of the wealthiest counties. I said, oh my God, I mean, I know it's around. Who knew it's happening right here in my neighborhood?
Isn't that funny how the market works that way? Maybe a definition for the market is you have a problem that you're outsourcing to someone else or something else because it can do it better than you could. And so you pay for it. And when you make something illegal, a part of the market illegal, you have a demand. And there's still people running it. That's, you kind of want to say, well, I don't want to go around those people. Those are people who skirt the law. But the activity itself hasn't changed, or the demand hasn't changed. And, we talk about that constantly, but may as well bring it up one more time.
And it's the same with drugs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, marijuana is legal now and used to be illegal. And what changed?
It was bad when they did it then, but now it's okay.
Well, I know a lot of people who smoke marijuana, and we need the money. And I guess those are two things: social acceptance and familiarity, and money making. So now I have online gambling, and it's ubiquitous in a way that if you're just like a regular person, you may not realize. So the New York Times, within the last couple of weeks, has had a series called Online Gambling. Here's the lead headline: Gambling spread. The popularity of sports betting has exploded in recent years in the U.S. That's such a bland statement. Everybody knows that. But what are the implications? How did that happen? It didn't used to be legal. They first legalized online gambling, betting, I think in New Jersey. And then after a while, people start saying, I don't know, why can't we do it? They made money. So I'm just going to actually read a part of the article. The article is so radical. Everything about addiction. That's why I love addiction. It's so incomprehensible. Unmet promises. Once sport betting was more broadly legalized, casinos teamed up with sports betting platforms like FanDuel and DraftKings, along with the major professional sports teams, to go state by state to push lawmakers to embrace it. Now, by the way, Pete Rose, who has over 4,000 votes, is not in the Hall of Fame because he gambled on baseball games while he was a baseball player.
Mm-hmm.
He's been banned for life from the Hall of Fame for gambling. And now, well, everybody gambles on it. And they had to do it state by state for whatever crazy reasons there are. And what was their toolkit for persuasion? Millions of dollars in contributions from the sports betting companies and their allies to those lawmakers' campaigns for office. So think about it if we're thinking about addiction. Well, what if marijuana growers donated millions of dollars to office holders to legalize it? Well, that's happening now. But what if heroin dealers did that? Or what if numbers, in a way, numbers dealers, the guys who run Harlem Numbers aren't the same guys who run state lotteries and gambling casinos. They're a different bunch of people. So the gambling industry also pressed states. This is the part, okay, now comes the money. The gambling industry also pressed states to keep tax rates low on sports betting. Why did they want to keep tax rates low on sports betting? I'll jump in with the answer here. Because tax rates is money for the state. Not tax rates is money for the gambling people. Warning that in the states push rates too high, sports fans would turn to the black market to place bets on unregulated sites. Those warnings were misplaced. I have to make a little side joke here. Some states, including New York and New Hampshire, ignored the industry's advice and installed the highest tax rates on betting. Now, maybe you've heard we recently lost a governor in New York, Andrew Cuomo, because he's so totally arrogant. But I could just see them coming into New York and saying, oh, you need to keep the tax rates low so we make more money. Here's where arrogance helps out. You just see Andrew, the governor saying, Andrew Cuomo, screw you. And plus, this is New York. They probably have, I'm just making all this up. They probably have guys they can call in where Cuomo says, hey, listen, you want me
this
to.
This guy says, yeah.
They have big money guys
Oh,
in New York. But that advice was wrong. To me, this is so funny. They have seen bets placed at a higher rate per capita than many low tax states. New York has seen so much betting. Even the gambling industry, the set rate was 20% taxing of bets. The gambling casinos recommended 10%, and New York taxed it at 51%. Screw the rest of the country. The state, New York, has collected $546 million in taxes in the first 10 months of this year. This is half of all the state revenues on sports betting nationwide. I personally, by the way, I don't gamble, and I oppose it on a kind of a moral level. To me, it's not a constructive activity. However, I live in New York State. $541 million, which is more than half of the tax revenue from gambling online in the country. I don't know what the hell they do with the money, but I take a public transportation bus. The buses are very, very cheap here. And so I would recommend to anybody not to gamble. On the other hand, the money is being used in a very constructive way to support my lifestyle. When they legalized marijuana and when they legalized casinos, they had a lot of regulation, but we've gotten really lax, little oversight. This is from the New York Times. Many of the states also allowed the gambling industry to give out hundreds of millions of dollars worth of tax-free bets to gamblers. Do you know how that works? In other words, here, if you bet, you bet your first $100 or $1,000 for free, then the gambling industry says to the state, oh, that's a business expense.
mm-hmm.
You have to, deduct it from our earnings. In New York, they didn't do that. And I guess, again, I have to I'm glad Governor Cuomo's gone, but I can just see him going, screw you. You want to be in New York or not? You have to be in New York. And so the promotions are intended to entice new customers to form a new habit, placing wagers on games. Does that remind you of any myths about heroin, Zach?
Well, I'm trying to figure out how you're constructing this. If you're saying like the slippery slope or gateway kind of a thing, then yeah, it kind of reminds me of that.
So the heroin myth,
but it also,
your first shot is for free.
Yeah.
A guy in Harlem in New York is going to say, oh, you can have your first shot for free. You're going to become instantly addicted. And then, I'll make thousands out of you. So that's the myth. But now they're using that as a marketing technique in gambling.
Yeah.
They're saying, oh, here, look, we just got gambling here. You can gamble for free. It is the modern day equivalent of the free bus ride to Atlantic City casinos with a roll of quarters thrown in for the slots. In New Jersey, in every city in New Jersey, you could take a bus to Atlantic City for free, and they give you $20 in a roll of quarters for free. You're riding the bus to Atlantic City, which I've done a number of times. And then you have $20 in quarters, and they expect you to put them in slot machines. But somebody just gave you $20 to take a bus to the beach. So it's getting pretty insidious now. At least $161 billion in wagers have been placed since sports betting was broadly legalized in the United States. $161 billion. We're talking big money now. This explosion of gambling is just the start. There are companies that do this. Betting companies have made clear that the ultimate goal is to bring so-called iGaming to states across the nation where customers can use their mobile phones to play blackjack, poker, and other casino-style games. So do you have a vision of all of this now? I mean, we're already going, we talk, you and I, and we're going to talk more about iPhone and other electronic addictions. That's applied specifically to kids and young people. But one way to characterize all of this is to say there's an industry in the United States who wants to get large numbers of people used to doing an addictive activity, an activity which for some becomes an overwhelming addiction. By the way, we do the Life Process program. It was originally conceived around gambling addiction because our partner at that time, that was his monkey. So he had a special interest, and he gambled online. That's how he got drawn in to gambling addiction in the UK.
So there are going to be companies who are going to be now the Purdue and the Johnson & Johnson of sports and online card games.
Yeah, why? I mean, of course, we're down on all those people, Purdue, Johnson & Johnson, because supposedly they got people addicted to opioids to make money. Okay, that's their problem. Just as you said, what do we call this? Where gambling companies are luring more and more people with free gifts even. They don't give out fentanyl. They don't give out, painkillers to people. You have to pay for them no matter who you are. But it's not, there's one level worse, Zach. Are you ready? University involvement. I'm reading from the New York Times. To market their expansion of sports betting, gambling sites reached unusual agreements with at least 8 universities, including Michigan State, the University of Colorado at Boulder, and Louisiana State University. The schools became partners with the companies in exchange for millions of dollars in payments. These deals generated questions about whether promoting gambling on campus, especially to people, the difference between this and, sports betting online, you can say, prove you're 21.
Mm-hmm.
But a bunch of people in college are under 21. The majority of people in college are 21. And the colleges, Louisiana State University, University of Colorado, they're marketing it to people who are at an age when they are vulnerable to developing gambling disorders. Is this something that universities should be doing? How colleges and sports betting companies Caesar's the name of a big gambling operation, Campus Life. In order to reap millions of dollars in fees, universities are partnering with betting companies to introduce their students and sports fans to online gambling. Other schools have struck deals to bring betting on campus. After Louisiana State University signed a similar deal in 2021 with Caesars, the university sent an email encouraging recipients, including these are students who are under 21 in many cases, who can't legally gamble in the United States, to place your first bet and earn your first bonus. And when the University of Colorado in Boulder in 2020 accepted $1.6 million to promote sports gambling on campus, a betting company sweetened the deal by offering the school an extra $30 every time someone downloaded the company's app and used the promotional code to place a bet. Now, what's going on here? I mean, let's go back to Harlem and Malcolm X. Malcolm X had a deal. Some guy Malcolm X was a numbers runner. Some guy ran the numbers industry. He was probably a killer, that guy. And his deal with Malcolm X was, every new customer you get, I'll give you $30. because that's a new customer. That works. Okay, we're talking back in the 30s in Malcolm X. We have this image in the 60s of the heroin dealer saying every new customer, if you ever saw the TV show set in Baltimore.
The Wire.
So the guy who runs that deal has guys on the street selling heroin. He would say something like, well, every new customer, I'll give you $100 extra, because that's a stream of income. Universities in the United States of America are using this technique to lure 18 years old into becoming accustomed to online gambling, some percentage of whom will regret it, and some small but real percentage of whom might completely throw off their lives.
And the marketing technique to that, if you just want to be antisocial about it or only think objectively, the heroin dealer on the street of Baltimore, that's a losing bet, because the idea is, well, I'll give someone a taste, and in all likelihood, they're not going to be able to escape its pull, and they're going to need to come back to me. Well, first of all, there are going to be other people on the street, but if you really run it and you think they'll come back to you, well, the fact is most people are not going to come back because you gave them something, But
and if you get it for free, they're not going to come back and give them $100 for it. A lot of them, you know what I mean? They're going to say, "Oh, I'll take this and I'm not going to pay $100 later."
Right. But it all comes down to scale. If you can get a small subset of, even if it's really small, of any population interested in this thing that's so easy to access and so lucrative, that's a winning game. Money-wise, it's winning. You don't have to get the majority of your customers to come back. You need to get a few.
Exactly. And so they're making the same logic in universities. But think of it. Those guys in Baltimore, they have to go out in the street and recruit people.
Mm-hmm.
Louisiana State is sending an announcement to every entering freshman, "Oh, you might be interested in online betting." Can you believe that?
It's like a gambling drone attack.
Yes. And I mean, if you're a parent, you have a kid who's 5 or 6, she's not going to college. My kids are 40 and 30. My grandkids are getting ready to go to college. If you're sitting there saying, "Oh, my kid's going to go to college," I mean, what are you worried about? Well, I need to get them clean bedding. I wonder what the meal plan is like. I hope they eat well, vegetables. Then maybe you worry, "Oh, are they going to start drinking on campus?" And maybe you worry, "Oh, are they taking drugs on campus still? What drugs are they?" That's some of the things you might worry about as a parent. You're not thinking the university per se is making money off introducing my child to online. They get paid to introduce my child to online gambling. Now, the whole answer to that, of course, is to have a sensible child who realizes he or she is sort of studying.
But the point you're making, of course, is that it's not just that gambling has become legal. People are all too excited to entice people who weren't otherwise thinking about gambling, perhaps, to get involved in the process.
And as you yourself pointed out, you only need a small percentage of people who become overwhelmed by it. To make your money, you like to spread it around as an overall activity, and a small number become really indebted to it. Well, that works for the gambling people as well. So we've come back to the beginning of this little discussion. Gambling can be addictive. Like every other addiction, it occurs as addictive for only a minority of participants. That minority can become completely overwhelmed. It can become life-destroying for them. That's a true thing that happens. We like to limit addiction, so we don't push drugs and alcohol, ideally, on stray people. We say, well, we don't rule it out. People drink and take drugs. If you're an adult, you can make that choice. We've gone one step farther where universities, major universities, Michigan State, University of Colorado, Boulder, LSU, are pushing a potentially addictive activity on young people, often below the age of consent, for a profit motive for themselves. And so, as I said, I love addiction and drugs because nothing we think about addiction and drugs makes sense. And if you reflect on it, I said for half a second, if you reflect on it for a minute, you say, well, we're against addiction. Everybody knows addiction's bad. Heroin's bad because it's addictive. The American Psychiatric Association lists only one thing as being officially addictive. It's gambling. And that thing is being offered, is being pushed on 18-year-old college students. How does this all add up to something sensible?
So we spent this time pointing out, as you said, you were getting ready to say, and I think I interrupted, it doesn't mean you need to panic as a parent or as a person introduced to gambling or people you know or love. It's more like, how do you get people ready to deal with the world? And the world's going to change, and how do you anticipate uncertainty? We'll talk more about that soon. But it's more just there's a hypocrisy. You can't do heroin. Heroin's bad. Heroin must be pushed underground at all costs. It's the worst thing in the... Gambling also is addictive. Hey, let's fund, let's send out, what are they called? The email threads to everybody on campus. Not only adults, but just let's not make it available. Let's put it in their face and make sure that they know that they can access it.
Like in your freshman packet,
Right.
Here's where the dorm, here's where the dining hall is. Oh, here's online gambling.
So it's worth just mentioning or adding, if people didn't follow for some reason, that it's not that you're disparaging gambling per se. You said you wouldn't gamble. It's not really a constructive activity. You're kind of throwing your money away and praying for something. Well, why don't you just build on it? That's you, and that's probably a good path to follow. On the other hand, we respect people's right to be able to do it if they choose, and it's not an evil thing. But the idea that this involvement, for some reason, even though it's the one thing deemed addictive, is something that we will now peddle ubiquitously, and that's okay, is so antithetical to the anything that could be addictive and harm you is not okay.
It's sort of like asking any politician or any university president, oh, are you for addiction or against addiction?
Right.
Have you ever heard of the American Psychiatric Association? They say gambling's addictive. You might have some psychiatrists at LSU or Michigan State.
You have any kids? You should get them to try it out.
So to summarize, why have I been thinking about addiction, and why is my interest in addiction not decreased over the last 70 years? I started thinking about addiction when I was 5.
Great fodder is thrown at you. You can't even avoid it.
There's nothing that's more bred into the irrationality around addiction and the nonsensicalness of how we view drugs, alcohol, and addiction. Is maybe it'll reach some final point where it'll blow up, but that hasn't blown up yet. We're still skiing down crazy slope.
The best we can do is point it out. Thank you for doing this today, Stanton.
Pleasure, Zach.